HPV?
That doesn't always bode well, does it? My name is Steve Moss, and for 35 years I was a Senior Inspector of Air Accidents at the Air Accidents Investigation Branch at Farnborough. You've asked me to view various clips from movies and critique how realistic they are. The major accidents that I've dealt with in those 35 years started with the fire on the runway at Manchester in 1985, then Lockerbie, Pan Am 103. I've never heard of electrical failures causing anything like that. Normally, electrical failures, if they happen, are likely to lead to gradual smoke. They don't really result in sort of explosions and fireballs and things like this. I've never heard of that, because they're protected. They have circuit breakers and fuses like you have in your car or at home. They would lose consciousness very quickly, within a few seconds. Pathologists did say that it was likely, if they're free falling out of the aircraft, that they would come to. But they'd be so confused and tumbling that they wouldn't know what the hell was going on.
I guess went for realism rating for that one.
3. Firstly, the aircraft wreckage looks very realistic. I like the wiring looms that are all hanging down. I like this is the sort of thing you see, carpets, seats everywhere. Brad Pitt and the zombie are in different parts of the aircraft. Depending on the nature of the impact, you can have a greater chance of surviving. But sometimes it's the rear, and sometimes it's the centre over the top of the wing, because on any aircraft that is a very strong part of the structure. But however, if there's a fire, you're also sitting right over the fuel tanks. I wouldn't say there's necessarily any great survival benefit from being in an aisle seat. If you've got an intact aircraft and there's a fire develops, then it's nice to be on an aisle seat rather than sort of jammed up against the windows. So I don't think statistics would bear out that the survivability is in an accident, in an impact, is greater for aisle seats than for a window seat. I'll give it 8. I wrote here, what is going on? I think it would simply punch a hole in the window, so you'd have a bullet-sized hole. What this thing appears to show is that the window disintegrates completely and takes a bit of the aircraft structure. Well, again, that really wouldn't happen, because what's known as the window belt line, so the part of the fuselage that the windows mount in is extra strong for that reason, because the holes that are cut out for the windows are an obvious weak point, so they make sure that the aircraft structure is beefed up in that area. They can run down. That's why if you see every time the flight attendants move a trolley and they stop, the first thing they do is they put on the brakes with their foot so that it doesn't slide. I give it 4. I don't think there's anything particularly wrong. I think that could happen, and that's likely the way that it would if it did happen, or if it does happen. The oxygen masks, yes, that's fair enough. They're designed to do that. If you have a depressurization, that was extremely rapid depressurization. People tend to think that it can happen with an impact. With a very heavy impact, vertical impact, sometimes they drop down, but their primary purpose is to drop down if the aircraft depressurizes at altitude. So it all adds to the visual effect. It's known in the trade as the rubber jungle. Yeah, I'll give that an 8. Yes, well, several things wrong with this clip. Bruce Willis seems to be able to reach inside the structure of the aircraft and pull a pipe out which starts fuel gushing out. I don't think that would really be possible. Another misconception amongst filmmakers is that jet fuel is incredibly flammable. It's not, it's the reverse. It's much less flammable than petrol. For a start, I don't think the flame going from his cigarette lighter along the trail and then up onto the aircraft would ever happen. Certainly not in those low temperatures. There's something about Bruce Willis films, isn't there? Is it Armageddon, where he goes up in a space shuttle to try and that thing's bouncing off rocks, you know, and they're the most delicate thing in the world, you know, a fleck of paint can bring those down.
If you have to give that one a rating out of 10, what would you give it?
2.
The elevator feels really stiff, sir. All right, don't force it.
He says the elevator has gone stiff, as though it's a lift. Well, no, they're always referred to in the plural, elevators. They're the movable surfaces at the rear of the aircraft that are controlled by the pilots to make the aircraft go up or go down or pitch up and pitch down.
Gears down. I don't think hydraulics is the problem, sir. We need to dump the fuel.
In an emergency, you always dump fuel. No, afraid not. That's the last thing on your mind. You're trying to get the aircraft under control. Dumping fuel isn't going to help you. The reason that long-haul aircraft might dump fuel is when they've got lots of time to prepare for an emergency landing. In an emergency like this, where they're struggling to control the aircraft, dumping fuel wouldn't even enter into their heads.
Oh, Lord Jesus, we're inverted! Fine, listen, we're level. We can maintain altitude like this.
Rolling an airliner inverted and flying it inverted, I really don't think so. I'm not sure the structure would actually withstand you. You'd break a wing or something because they're not meant to fly under negative G.
Now we got to revert to manual control. Your side first. Okay, got it. Nothing, no control.
The scenario of this is a little bit obscure. He talks about hydraulic failure and then talks about going to manual. He then has this big handle that he pulls and select, and it gives him manual control. Most modern aircraft, it wouldn't be possible to fly them in manual, and bigger aircraft, you can't fly them manually. They're too heavy.
20.
Brace.
10. Minimum.
Brace for impact.
Seems to be a relatively straightforward, what's known as a dead stick landing. In other words, no engines operating, and it's probably nose high. So he'd make the landing like that, try and touch down. So the cockpit would be well clear of the ground. So it's only if they ran into something, a solid object, you know, building or something like that, that the cockpit would be compromised. The scenario doesn't really hang together, so I'll give that a 5. Of the clips I've seen, that I think is the most realistic. I think that is what would happen. It's quite well done, the graphics. What happens next, though, I think is perhaps not so realistic. Now, if we look at the wreckage, the term we used to use was disrupted. It's very badly broken up. As he runs in, he keeps coming across passengers like this person on fire. I don't think anybody would have survived the impact. I notice an engine is still winding down. Yes, maybe, but I think the engine would be pretty much battered and jammed by the impact. I'll give that 8.
Birds.
Whoa.
When you certify an engine design, a new engine design. They actually fire birds at it of a specified weight and at a speed and check that the engine doesn't break up. And then it's going to get damaged, but what they don't want is for it to start.
Ignition start.
It sort of gives you the impression that the engines have failed completely. I don't think they did. I think they weren't delivering enough power for him to remain airborne. And I think there would have been a lot of, it all goes very quiet and very still. I think there would have been a lot of vibration. I mean, it is realistic, and then it should be, because I think it's probably one of the most documented sequence of events of recent years, isn't it? One of the things that I didn't like about this film, it wasn't the technical side of it, it was the totally invented antipathy from the National Transportation Safety Board and Sully himself. In other words, they come across as bullying and accusative, that he didn't do the right thing. That was a complete invention. I believe Sullenberger himself said that was not, that the NTSB actually supported him. He famously was in a film called Castaway, where there is an air crash. He, I think, is the only survivor. That was quite a bit unrealistic, you know, with engines continuing to run, and at one point he's in danger of being sucked into this engine that was still running, even though it was in water. Oh, I think it's got to be at least 9.
Okay, setting course for 090. Prepare to descend.
Maybe there's documentary evidence that says that Howard Hughes did fly in shirt sleeves without a seatbelt, in what looks like a car seat with a headrest, in what appears to be quite a nice sizable room. I mean, this is supposed to be a fighter, isn't it? A prototype fighter or fighter bomber. They're incredibly complex. You see bits of the structure, there's pipes and wires everywhere. I really would very much doubt if the prototype of a new combat aircraft was as roomy and uncluttered as that.
Ah! I'm going down!
Now, if we look at the wing route here that's visible, you can see a dent in it. But in the other shots of it, it's pretty much intact apart from the bits it's lost. And I'm not too sure about the landing gear running across the roof.
So do you have a realism mark for this one?
6. I'm intrigued about what these devices are that they're fastening into the fuselage. I think the first time you tried to put any weight on this, or to put any pull on it, those would pull out. There's not a lot holding them in. The fuselage would just give way. Assuming it's a real airborne sequence and not CGI, it must have been pre-prepared. So yes, you can do a shot like this, but the aircraft's probably got strengthened ring inside it, an invisible rigid ring. I would have given it a 5, but I'll give it 1 for the fact that it is a well-prepared stunt. The sound of the engines is all wrong. They have recorded a twin-piston engined aircraft, which makes that sort of growling dive bomber type noise. This aircraft is a turboprop, which makes a sort of more like a whine. Because it's got propellers, they all make the same sound, and that's not the case. This was quite well known at the time, a quite famous accident at the time, because people survived for, I think it was 72 days in those freezing conditions. And I'm afraid the macabre bit was that they actually had to resort to cannibalism to survive. But of course, cannibalism and those who died in the accident. There's a warning light flashing that says pull up. I'm pretty certain that would not have been fitted to this aircraft at the period of 1972, was it, 1973? It's a system called Ground Proximity Warning System, and it was developed and mandated in 1974. I think they're getting it confused with what is known as a stall warning, because the pilot is heaving back on the stick to try and avoid the mountain. He would probably be in danger of stalling the aircraft. One of the first things to note is the whole sequence is lasting far too long. In fact, I timed it from first impact with the mountain where the tail came off until it came to rest, and it was a minute. Another very common movie misconception, because I guess they just want to stretch out the action a bit. You know, the real thing probably would have been over in a few seconds. And certainly this massive ski jump that the aircraft performs, and it lands, it's still intact, it's not even deformed. It would have been a massive crushing blow. I'd give it 6 out of 10. I've written here, like this one, a water landing is a ditching. A lot of media get that wrong. They talk about the aircraft ditched on land. Ditching is purposely executed landing on water. It depends on the type of aircraft. The Sully film showed that it can be done with a modern airline. It's one of the very few cases of a modern airliner actually successfully ditching. It's not the worst thing that can happen. I happen to know that the B-24 Liberator was a difficult aircraft to ditch. It had a habit of breaking into two. The poor old pilots were the least likely, I think, to get out. I don't think the gunners would stay in their turrets if they know they're going to ditch. They would take up a position probably somewhere around the middle of the aircraft. I'm going to give it 9. I wrote here, what is going on?